What's everybody? Welcome back to the Grand Torino. A couple of interesting articles on a Twitter thread I'd like to read out to you today, following on from a reader's letter in the Irish Times today, which ties back into Cormac Lucy's uh, Sunday Times article, which he wrote here yesterday. Again, I'll leave links to all of the articles that I read out today in the description box down below. Please, before we begin, don't forget, press the like button, press the subscription button and the blue bell, and you'll be reminded of future broadcasts here on the Gran Torino. Now, without further ado, Deliveroo and You, the title of today's show. And the title is Not Everyone Can Be a Winner as Ireland Becomes a Land of Immigration. Ireland has experienced massive changes in many areas over the past 2 to 3 decades, thanks to foreign direct investment. Income levels have risen much faster among our neighbours. We have experienced credit and property boom and bust. We have seen a revolution in social attitudes towards divorce, same-sex marriage and abortion. These huge changes have been accompanied by considerable public debate. But Ireland's change from being a land of emigration to one of immigration has been accompanied by comparatively little discussion. The 1981 census recorded a population of 3,443,405, of whom just 191,828, or 5.6%, had been born outside the island of Ireland. The most recent consensus in 2016 showed a population of 4,689,921, of whom 753,000, just under 16%, had been born outside of Ireland. Over the intervening 35 years, Ireland's population therefore grew by 1,246,516, of which 561,000, roughly 45%, comprised of people born outside Ireland. This represents massive social change, but it has been accompanied by relatively little public debate. Nonetheless, a big societal shift creates winners and losers. Among the biggest winners are owners of property. Ireland's rapidly growing population must be housed. And with the supply of new homes constrained, especially in our cities where population growth has been greatest, property owners are big winners. Capital values and the potential rental incomes that their buildings can support are considerably higher than they would have been otherwise have been. Ireland's banks must also have been winners. Collateral values increase and the likelihood of loan defaults fall. And Cormac points out, drops in this graph here, showing from the Central Statistics Office from 1996 to 2018. And you can see the highest change happening here in what shows an explosion in migration after Bertie Ahern's crony capitalist regime signed us up for the full freedom of movement or open borders in 2004. With the EU's A8 Eastern European new member states expansion. Notably, countries like France, Germany, Spain took a 5-year derogation on freedom of movement because they knew well what would happen. Famously, our own genius politicians underestimated the numbers that would move from Poland and Lithuania. The only other EU countries that signed up for this in 2004 were Great Britain and Sweden. And I'd also like to bring your attention as well, because I missed it myself last week, that the graph shows that the rest of the world here in yellow now supersedes any EU immigration from the rest of the EU 28 countries. So the rest of the world now exceeds any European immigration into Ireland. I think that's pertinent and should be well noted. The arrival of large pools of workers, many of whom have a university education, increased the supply of labour. All things being equal, that should reduce the price of labour. With the unemployment rate down to 4.4% in May, wage inflation is steadily growing. In its most recent quarterly review, the Central Bank of Ireland forecast average wage growth of 3.6% this year and 3.7% next year. Yet, how much steeper might wage inflation be today if only 6.7% of jobs were held by other nationalities, as was the case in 2004, rather than the 16.3% they currently hold? Other beneficiaries of heavy immigration are the better off. They generally don't face much increased wage competition, but can avail themselves of cheaper labour further down the employment food chain. In February, Brazilian Deliveroo cyclists called radio stations and said that they believe that teenagers were communicating on social media with a view to staging harassment, abuse, and physical attacks. And it begs the question of where are the Irish Deliveroo drivers? It's not just fast food delivery that depends on overseas workers to be able to operate. A review of the labour permits issued by the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation in the first half of this year reveals that nearly 30% of permits issued fell under the category of medical and nursing. Speaking on RT1's news last year, Phil, General Secretary of the Irish Nurses and Midwives Organisation, stated that the Irish hospitals were totally dependent on nurses from outside the EU. Care homes for the elderly also appeared to be heavily dependent on care staff from outside Ireland. Rates of national economic growth would hardly have been quite so stupendous if we hadn't imported so many workers from abroad. They help get our rates of economic output up, improving official measures of our national debt that are generally compared with various measures of output. Arguably, the benefits are fewer for those lower down the socio-economic ladder. Unskilled natives with less education than the average face increased levels of job competition from eager migrants. A year ago, Heather Humphreys, the Minister for Business, Enterprise and Innovation, announced that she had approved an additional 500 work permits for low-skilled, low-wage employees from outside the EU to work in the meat industry. For meat factory owners, this is good news. For unskilled natives looking for meat sector jobs, though, there is no evidence that this is a huge cohort. It's not so good. It's also likely to keep a collar on wage inflation in the industry. Arriving migrants add to the rental market pressure when they seek accommodation. There is also increased pressure on public services to adapt to increased demand for health, education, and other social services. The trade union movement and the political left have been relatively quiet about the economic and social implications of heavy levels of immigration. As a matter of politics, they favour international solidarity and are sceptical of nationalism. At an Oireachtas Business Committee meeting hearing the skills needs for businesses and workers last September, Senator Kevin Humphreys argued that the work permit system was in need of reform as it created indentured servitude by tying some of non-EU workers to their employees. The former Minister of State for Employment, Community and Social Support said that they were boonie workers in the meats industry on $22,000 a year, and that some employees felt afraid to speak up about the conditions for fear of losing their jobs, as those were from the outside of the EU were relying on retaining their job to keep their visas. That is one way of squaring the circle. In a recent central bank's research paper, Employment Growth, Where Do We Go From Here?, Stephen Byrne and Tara McIndoe-Calder concluded that the conditions in the domestic labour market were consistent with full employment. They anticipated that the sustained increase in net inward migration would be needed to ensure that economic growth was not impeded by labour supply constraints. They concluded that the net inward migration would be the most important source for employment in the short to medium term if an economy has reached full employment. Should job growth be so unfettered, immigration seems to be yet another key area where nobody is in charge and policy is adrift, often reflecting yesterday's priorities and not today's. That is, if there is even a policy at all. That brings me to a letter in today's Irish Times. Sir, as one who operates a small cafe in Dublin, I find it a bit rich that the venture capitalists funded multinationals like Deliveroo, with which I compete with on a daily basis, wish to avoid the employee costs that I, as a very small operator, have to pay. Because Deliveroo claims its staff are self-employed, it avoids paying the minimum hourly wage, employers' PRSI, bank holiday pay, and 4 weeks of annual holiday pay. I employ part-time staff, and they too are free to work elsewhere, but in addition to paying their wages, I have an estimated 25% levy on top. If the big boys want to compete in Ireland, then they should man up and pay the same cost as the rest of yours, etc. Charles McLaughlin. It just goes to show that mass migration drives down labour costs, maximises profits for the global multinationals. But as a friend of mine often says, or puts it in an analogy like, why do you order in Deliveroo food instead of cooking your own food, millennial Irish man and millennial Irish woman. Because my one bedroom rabbit hutch apartment lacks a kitchen to cook food in. Well, why don't you simply rent a room in a house like your parents did when they were 20 something? Because all those houses are full of Brazilian Deliveroo drivers living three to a room. And I want to leave you with this thread by Professor Jeremiah Honkelberg on Twitter. Get your Leaving Cert results and just missed out on college? Can't afford rent to live near your university? Find out how immigration has squeezed many Irish kids out of college by driving up rents and points as immigrants manipulate the system. Professor Honkelberg continues, points have been driven up in recent years not by the achievements of students, but by immigrants gaming the system by sitting easy exams in their native languages and getting undeserved high grades and points. Almost 60% of all students who sat Russian were handed full points with a H1, while virtually every student got at least a H4. By comparison, only 4% of music students and 3% of construction students received H1. And thereby showing you the graph there. Again, I'll leave the link to the thread in the description box. Have a look through it. But the professor continues, it's not just Russian, but Portuguese, Japanese, Arabic, Italian, and Polish, which are offering inflated points for easy exams to native speakers. The absurd high performance level in Portuguese exams are mostly down to recent influx of Brazilian immigrants. These exams are incredibly easy for native speakers who in many cases gain exemptions from Irish. These exemptions are in spite of them often learning English in the same period, which is only one of the official languages of the Irish state. Since the Fine Gael Labour government of the early part of the decade, a conscious effort has been made to squeeze Irish students out of the college system and prepare low-paid workers through migrant education schemes. How? Fees and related costs have increased in recent years due to Fine Gael Labour's decision to offering funding to non-citizens over actual Irish people. The reason that costs have escalated is to accommodate the people here living in Ireland, but not the citizens here. Migrants win concession on third level education fees. Students with Irish or EU passports will no longer have to pay up to 12,000 yearly. So how did Ruairi Quinn and Labour's decision to give preferential treatment to non-Irish play out? Beautifully for them. A 45% increase over 4 years, 13,500 people, 128,250,000 a year washed down the drain when it could have been educating our own people. And he links to an article, number of non-EEA students in Ireland reaches record level. Here's where they're coming from. And the professor continues, but why would a left-wing government do this? Partly because Euro-nationalists Fine Gael and Labour are committed to depopulating Ireland of natives by 2040. But also because they are cheap labour. That's where it's key. Cheap labour for the globalists, for the corporations. You have mass migration, open borders, free movement of labour drives wages down. But also because they are cheap labour. Third level is being used to recruit and retain obedient migrant employees. Another link, new scheme could allow up to 5,500 non-EEA nationals remain in Ireland to work. But wait, I've heard lots about direct provision. I've seen immigrants working low-level jobs. You're seeing what you want to see. Working class Irish native with participation at third level is in the single digits. Immigrants are at 48%. Again, more articles linking to his claim. Lastly, the big problem with immigration and college is supporting yourself there. Immigration is squeezing Irish college kids out of part-time work as Irish people cost too much. Even the central bank admits so much. Not enough migrants arriving to keep the pay down, central bank. That was in the Independent Business. Rents have gone through the roof thanks to unlimited migration from Brazil, India, Poland, and other places. Where Irish college kids used to live in Dublin, there are now some 9, 10, 11 Brazilians or more chipping into a room to pay for these huge prices in rent. Again, another link to the article. Spanish, Romanians, and Brazilians are moving to Ireland in their droves, official data reveals. And you can tie that back in with the explosion in 2004 as detailed in Cormac Lucy's article, in the previous article. The professor continues, in the midst of all of this, free-falling performers in Leaving Cert exams have been Irish males. Are they disengaged from a highly feminized secondary school system? Are they alienated by overemphasis on office skills rather than real education? Questions need to be asked. So when you go to university, especially males, it's up to you. You can keep falling for the lies that liberals tell you, that you're better off because of their focus on immigration and issues like abortion, or you can start asking that you be put first in your country. With Brexit and a 100% chance of recession in Ireland slowly looming, it's on the hills, another act of deference towards the Liberal elite and their Ireland 2040 plan will only bring about more disengagement, alienation and swindling by Rory Quinn and the Labour's ilk. The time to stand up is now. And he also refers to Stefan Molyneux's recent article, which has been completely scuppered by YouTube, but you can find it on BitChute. I'll leave a link to that in the description box. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave it there. I leave all the links in the description box down below. Let's talk about one of the big elephants in the room, immigration. Its effect on Indigenous Ireland, its effect on the immigrants here presently. I mean, I can't imagine the squalor of the living conditions, living 3 to 4 to a room. I've seen it myself personally. You only have to get down into the inner suburbs of Dublin, and many people are sharing 4 to 5 to a room. How can native Irish compete with that labour market when their living standard costs? If you have a mortgage, you're trying to keep your kids at school, and you're competing in the same market where people are sharing 3 or 4 to a room. It's nonsense. Let's have this debate soon. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave that there. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Grand Torino, and I'll see you again on the next episode. Don't forget, press the like button, press the subscription button, and the blue bell, and I'll see you again on the next episode. Us.